It happened at the kind of restaurant that tried too hard to look effortless. Marble tables, candles that flickered like they were auditioning for a perfume commercial, waiters who whispered instead of speaking. My sister, Sophia, sat at the head of the table, glowing with the sort of confidence that comes from being universally adored. She had just sold her tech startup for a number so large, our parents had to Google how many zeros that actually meant. The night was meant to celebrate her success. I told myself I was happy for her, and I was, in theory. But there's a difference between admiration and erasure, and in my family, admiration for Sophia always required a certain amount of my own invisibility. "Can we have a toast?" she announced, rising from her seat, the light catching the diamond bracelet that had once been mine until she borrowed it years ago. The room quieted. She lifted her glass with practiced grace. To risk, to brilliance, to knowing your lane, and staying in it. People laughed politely. I smiled, the way you do when you're pretending to be in on the joke that was really about you. She continued, her tone playful, her eyes sharp. "Not everyone is meant for the pressure of high-stakes business. Some of us build companies," she said, gesturing to herself. "And some of us build hobbies." A soft wave of laughter moved around the table. The kind that sounds harmless if you don't know where it lands. My cheeks burned. My mother glanced at me briefly, then looked down at her plate, pretending to adjust her napkin. My father's smile faltered, but he said nothing. I felt the familiar script unfolding. Sophia shines, the room applauds, and I sit quietly, the supporting character in her story. It had been this way since childhood. Talent contests, graduations, job offers. I was always the applause track beneath her solo. Sophia clinked her glass against mine with a mockingly gentle tap. "You'll find your thing one day," she said, almost tenderly. "Something small, something lovely. You're good with your hands, right?" Something inside me cracked. Quiet but seismic. I looked at her perfectly composed face, at the gleam of her bracelet, my bracelet, and realized that she genuinely believed the hierarchy she was describing. In her mind, she was the architect, and I was the ornament. The laughter around us faded into an indistinct hum. My voice came out calm when I finally spoke. "You're right," I said. "I am good with my hands." She smiled, satisfied, thinking I had accepted my role. But inside, a different conversation began. One between the part of me that had always stayed quiet and the part that was tired of folding itself into politeness. That night, while Sophia basked in champagne and validation, I slipped away early, telling everyone I had an early morning. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through my windshield like molten gold. I kept hearing her words on repeat. Build hobbies. When I got home, I turned on the small lamp above my work table. The faint smell of metal and resin filled the air. On the table lay fragments of an opal I had cracked weeks earlier, pieces I'd meant to throw away. I picked one up. Under the light, it shimmered, fractured, imperfect, but alive. I pressed it against my palm, feeling its coolness, its weight, its refusal to be dismissed as broken. And for the first time in years, I smiled, because maybe she was right about one thing. I wasn't like her, and that was exactly where my power began. A morning came in the gray-blue way it does when a city is exhausted from celebrating someone else. My phone lit up with photos from the dinner. Sophia framed by crystal and compliments. My own face appearing at the edge of a few shots like a watermark no one asked for. I put the phone face down and turned to the room that understood me better than any family toast ever had. My studio was the size of a generous closet and smelled faintly of metal dust and lemon oil. A thrifted workbench ran along the window, its surface scored with the history of failed ideas. Trays of stones weighted like small planets on felt, moonstone, labradorite, slivers of tourmaline the color of bruised dawn. In the center, the opal fragments from last night's decision, one shard milky, another igniting with fire when I turned it under the lamp, broken light, refusing to be ordinary. I set water boiling for tea and pulled my hair back, feeling the familiar click of routine. When my hands moved, my mind followed, less chatter, more knowing. I gathered tools, the fine saw, the bent-nose pliers, the micro-torch that hissed when I bled it to life. Heat is honest, my father used to say. It reveals what metal wants to do. He'd taught us in a shop that never pretended to be glamorous. Cement floor, radio always a little too loud, his hands nicked and silvered with filings. He'd let us play with copper first, then brass, saving sterling for the day we earned it with patience. Sophia had been bored by the slowness, By the way, craft demands humility. She wanted results that could be screenshotted. Metrics, milestones, headlines. I wanted the hum you feel when a shape finally tells you what it wants to be. We were both ambitious. We just worshipped different gods. I cradled the opal in a strip of leather, studying the fracture line. It wasn't random. It followed a hidden logic, like a map of pressure and time. I aligned 2 shards and watched them meet in a seam that caught the light and multiplied it. Imperfection as architecture. Maybe that was the point. Not to hide the break, but to set it, honor it, frame it, until it became the most honest part. I sketched quickly in a battered notebook, thin bezel and gold fill to hug the stone without swallowing it. Attention setting, minimal, allowing air and light. A chain that didn't apologize. On the margin, I wrote the words before I could second-guess them. Broken light. The letters looked unassuming on paper, but the phrase filled the room like a decision. I cleared space, taped down a square of charcoal block, and breathed. The torch kissed the solder until it ran, the bezel's edges melting into certainty. My hands moved in small, precise negotiations. File, test, file again, until the metal stopped resisting and became agreement. When I pressed the opal into its new home, the stone caught the morning and broke it into color so subtle I felt my chest loosen. We had found each other's shape. I took photos on the windowsill with a sheet of wax paper as diffuser, the way I'd taught myself in nights of trial and error. Natural light loved honesty. I shot the seam in close-up, the flaw documented like a signature. Then I opened my laptop and did the work no one claps for. Searched the trademark database, reserved a domain, grabbed the handles before anyone could pretend they'd thought of them first. I drafted a brand story that didn't lie. I used to think success meant shine without cracks. Then something broke, and the light got interesting. I built a simple product page, the kind investors call unsophisticated, when they don't understand intimacy, and set a password on it like a secret I wasn't quite ready to tell. In a spreadsheet, I listed suppliers who answered emails like humans, not vending machines. I marked lead times, minimums, and the places where failure would try to sneak in. Chains, clasps, packaging, the fiscal cliff called shipping. A message from Sophia slid across the screen. A photo of her at the after party, a caption about playing in the big leagues. I stared at it for a heartbeat, then archived the thread. There are silences that wound, and silences that weld. I chose the latter. Back at the bench, I made a second piece, smaller, sharper, a cousin rather than a copy. While I worked, memory unspooled. The middle school art fair, where my wire-wrapped stone won a ribbon until Sophia's science project walked off with the principal. The summer I learned to solder while she learned to pitch. Our mother, loving us both, but fluent in the language the world rewarded. It wasn't cruelty, it was gravity. By late afternoon, the studio floor glittered with filings like ground stars. I boxed the 2 finished pieces in craft paper I stamped by hand. The stamp was crooked. I left it that way on purpose. Perfection had never once saved me. I poured another cup of tea and stood by the window, the city moving without me, like it always had and always would. Somewhere, a siren threaded through traffic. Somewhere, a child laughed from a balcony. Somewhere, a woman ended a relationship she didn't know how to survive and would. Life, breaking and becoming in loops. I touched the necklace at my throat, a placeholder chain, nothing special, and imagined the opal's cool honesty against skin. Some of us build hobbies, Sophia had said. Maybe. Or maybe some of us build cathedrals small enough to wear, sanctuaries that rest at the pulse. Maybe some of us choose businesses that don't need applause to be true. I turned off the torch, swept the filings into a jar labeled Rain, and powered down the lamp. The room exhaled. So did I. Tomorrow I would take a breath big enough to sound like a dare. I would open the password, post the story, show the seam, and invite strangers to recognize their own. And if no one came, then I would try again, and again, until the light learned my name. That night, I slept with the opal on my bedside table, its fractured gleam catching the last stray headlights. Broken, yes, but in that break was a map, and I was finally ready to follow it. There's a kind of silence that follows creation. Not peace exactly, but the hollow echo of waiting. The morning after I posted my first photo of the broken light necklace, I woke with a pulse of hope so bright it hurt. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and refreshed the page every 5 minutes like prayer. 10 likes, then 20. A handful of polite comments from friends. So pretty. Love this. The digital equivalent of nodding without listening. By evening, the number had stalled. The world hadn't noticed. The internet was too busy worshipping Sophia's new Forbes feature, the startup queen of the East Coast. Her face smiled from every sidebar. Our last name glowed like a brand I had been written out of. I told myself this was fine, that real success grew slowly. Still, the silence pressed against my ribs. I made more pieces, photographed them, wrote captions that tried too hard to sound effortless. I watched as posts sank like stones. Every small sale felt both miracle and insult. At night, I scrolled through Sophia's feed. Rooftop events, panel discussions, photo ops with investors. Her world looked expensive and aerodynamic. Mine smelled of solder and candle wax. She posted a story one evening holding a champagne flute, saying, "To the builders who build empires, and to everyone else, keep dreaming." I knew who the everyone else was. My hands ached from hammering wire into obedience, but I kept going. Each failed day fed something stubborn in me. I studied analytics like a map, learned which images lingered longer under a stranger's thumb. I read articles about storytelling and product-market fit until my eyes blurred. And then, quietly, I began to experiment. Instead of polished images, I filmed the process, the heat, the small burns, the sound of metal cooling in water. The camera caught what I had always hidden, the human pulse behind the product. When I uploaded the clip, I wrote, "This isn't luxury. It's labor, and it's love." It wasn't strategy. It was honesty. Yet honesty has its own kind of algorithm. The video began to move. A few hundred views, then thousands. Comments appeared from women whose names I didn't know. This made me cry. I needed this today. I'm saving for one. Something small had cracked open. Weeks passed, and so did more failures. Orders got lost. One shipment of stones arrived chipped beyond repair. My website crashed under the weight of 50 simultaneous visitors, a problem that felt both tragic and luxurious. Still, the graph crept upward like a heartbeat. I kept my day job in marketing, answering polite emails from people who thought brand storytelling meant writing adjectives. No one there knew about Broken Light. It was my secret rebellion, a soft empire growing quietly under my fingertips. Sometimes, in the subway, I'd overhear strangers talking about jewelry brands, naming all the glossy ones I could never afford. I'd finger the opal pendant beneath my blouse and whisper to myself, "They'll know mine someday." And slowly, the work began to know me back. Every piece I made taught me something: how to listen to imperfection, how to charge what effort is worth, how to survive being unseen without becoming invisible. When Sophia texted, "Dinner next week? I can give you some business advice," I didn't answer. Instead, I spent that night packing 6 small boxes to ship, each piece wrapped in paper stamped handmade from what was once broken. Before sealing the last one, I recorded a short message and uploaded it to my page. If you've ever been underestimated, I see you. If someone told you your dream was a hobby, this is your sign to keep building anyway. Because small beginnings are not small hearts, they're foundations. The post ended with a simple line that came from somewhere deeper than strategy. If this speaks to you, share it. Not for me, but for everyone who needs to hear it. By morning, it had been shared 3,000 times. My inbox overflowed, not with orders, but with stories. Women describing how they'd left jobs, how they'd started again, how they'd hidden their light, because someone told them it was too dim to matter. Reading them, I cried quietly over my breakfast. Not because I had succeeded, but because connection was beginning to sound like my own name. Still, the numbers weren't enough to quit my job. Rent and reality are louder than applause, but momentum had learned where I lived. Each post gathered more eyes. Each necklace left my desk a little faster. I began signing packages with a new line, a promise stitched into every sale. Thank you for believing that beauty can come from what breaks. If you're reading this and you've ever felt invisible, don't wait for permission. Create something, anything, post it, show it. Let the world misunderstand you until it can't anymore. Because someone out there is scrolling right now, looking for proof that quiet people can still build loud miracles. Be that proof. And if you're here, listening to my story, hit that like button, share this with someone who's tired of being underestimated, and tell me in the comments, what have you built in silence that deserves to be seen? And the night everything changed didn't announce itself. It arrived disguised as exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your fingertips after too many small hopes and not enough results. My apartment was a mess of half-finished chains and invoices that didn't quite add up. The scent of solder still hung in the air, heavy and metallic, clinging to my hair like proof that I'd been fighting for something invisible. I had spent the day packaging orders that barely covered shipping costs, writing thank you notes in careful cursive I hoped looked more confident than I felt. The internet had slowed again. Engagement dropped. Sophia's newest startup teaser was trending. I told myself that virality was a storm, and storms move on. Still, it was hard not to feel like I was shouting into weather that didn't care. That night, I forced myself out of the apartment to attend a networking event for local artisans. The invitation had been sitting in my inbox for weeks. Bring samples, it said, and your elevator pitch. I didn't have either polished, but something stubborn made me go. Maybe faith, maybe spite. The event was held in a renovated warehouse where ambition smelled like espresso and new paint. People floated between pop-up booths holding business cards like shields. I set up a small display on a reclaimed wood table, 5 necklaces, 1 bracelet, all lit by a borrowed desk lamp that flickered every few seconds. My name card read simply, Clara. Broken light jewelry. No one stopped at first. They passed by, their eyes sliding over me toward the louder brands with banners and ring lights. I adjusted my layout, smiled when my cheeks hurt, told myself invisibility was still a kind of armor. Then a man in a worn linen jacket paused, picked up one of the opal pendants, and turned it in his fingers. This piece, he said softly. It looks alive. I laughed awkwardly. That's the goal. He looked up. No, I mean it breathes. You left the fracture visible. It was already there, I said. I just framed it. He nodded slowly, then asked if I'd ever heard of kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending ceramics with gold. They call it golden repair, he said. The break becomes part of the story. What you're doing, it's that, but with light. His words hit me harder than any sale could have. No one had ever spoken about my work like that, as if it belonged to a lineage of meaning. He introduced himself as Michael, a curator who sourced independent designers for a luxury concept store downtown. Your collection feels honest, he said. People are tired of perfect things. Send me a catalog, if you have one. I didn't, but I said I would. I spent that night awake at my workbench building it from scratch. No design software, no agency polish, just me, coffee, and a Word document stitched with images I'd taken on my phone. I wrote each description like a letter to the person I hoped would wear it. This isn't jewelry to decorate you. It's jewelry that remembers you survived. By dawn, I hit send. Then, still trembling with caffeine and disbelief, I posted a photo of my display from the night before with a caption that simply said, I went to a room full of strangers and remembered that my work can speak louder than my doubt. I added a quiet call to action. If you've ever shown up scared, comment still here. Let's find each other. Thousands did. The comment section turned into a constellation of vulnerability. Artists, writers, mothers, anyone who dared to create under the weight of being underestimated. I replied to every 10th message until my fingers cramped. 3 days later, Michael emailed again. Come by the store next week, he wrote. Bring your pieces. I think we can make something happen. I went, wearing a blazer that didn't fit quite right, and my most recent pendant, the opal with the fault line like a tiny lightning bolt. The store was cathedral quiet, all glass and white marble. He introduced me to his business partner, a woman named Aisha, who handled brand collaborations. They examined my jewelry, the way surgeons study miracles. We want to feature you in our emerging artists window next month, Aisha said finally. Limited collection, storytelling included. My breath caught. Storytelling? She smiled. Your captions. Your words are part of the art. Don't lose that voice. I left the store in a daze, the city roaring around me like applause I hadn't yet earned. At a red light, I checked my phone. My follower count had doubled overnight. One of my videos, me polishing an opal while narrating about imperfection, had been reposted by a lifestyle influencer with 2 million followers. Orders were pouring in faster than I could process. That night, I turned on the camera and spoke directly to it. I used to think my work was too small to matter, I said. But sometimes the smallest flame is the one that starts the fire. If you've been waiting for a sign to start, this is it. Comment a single word, ready, and share this with someone who forgot how strong their cracks are. The video exploded. By morning, I had thousands of notifications, interview requests, DMs from people wanting custom pieces. My website crashed under the weight of curiosity, and somewhere between panic and awe, I realized that the thing Sophia had always mocked, the hands that built instead of bragged, had finally spoken loudly enough to be heard. I sat at my bench as the sun climbed over the city and whispered, "You see, Sophia, the light doesn't need permission to break through." Then I opened my laptop and began drafting the plan for my first real collection. Naustundi dinam, or if you believe every fracture can become a doorway, tap the heart, share this chapter, and tell me in the comments, what's the spark you've been afraid to follow? The morning the collection went live, the city outside was gray and indifferent. Clouds hung low over the skyline, heavy enough to touch. It felt fitting. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted quiet proof that the work was real. The collaboration with the concept store had been announced 2 weeks earlier, and the reaction online had been overwhelming. The Broken Light Collection, the press release read, handcrafted jewelry that celebrates imperfection as design. For days, my inbox filled with interviews, small features, and endless logistics. But now it was just me, my laptop, and a single green button that said Publish Site. I clicked it. Nothing changed in the room, but something inside me shifted. The website went live at 9 a.m. The first order came at 9:07, a pendant to an address in Seattle. By 9:12, there were 6. I watched the numbers climb in real time, the way people watch a storm build on the horizon. By noon, the site had sold out of 2 designs. My hands shook. I made tea just to have something to hold. Every sound in my apartment felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the scrape of my chair, the heartbeat in my ears. I kept refreshing the dashboard, terrified the numbers would suddenly vanish, that it had all been a mistake. But they didn't vanish. They grew. At 1:30, my phone buzzed with a message from Michael, the curator who had first noticed me. "Congratulations. It's official. We have a phenomenon on our hands." I stared at his words, half disbelieving. Phenomenon. That was what they called other people's success stories. Orders poured in from names I'd never seen. Teachers, nurses, artists, even a corporate executive who wrote in her note, "I needed to be reminded that cracks can still shine." Each purchase felt personal, not like a transaction, but like a conversation continued through metal and stone. That afternoon, I recorded a video for my followers. The camera trembled slightly because my hands wouldn't stay still. "I thought today would feel loud," I said, "but it feels quiet, like calm after years of noise. If you ordered from this collection, thank you. You didn't just buy jewelry, you proved that something made with care can still matter." Then, almost as an afterthought, I added, "If you've ever built something small, fragile, maybe even foolish, and you're waiting for someone to see it, keep going. I see you. And if this story gives you strength, share it. Someone else needs to hear that patience is a kind of power." By evening, the video had 200,000 views. The comment section turned into a chorus of people confessing what they were building. Novels, bakeries, gardens, new lives. I stayed up reading until dawn, the screen light reflecting in the unfinished pieces scattered on my desk. The next morning, I woke to an email from Aisha. The store's window display had gone live downtown. My name etched in glass beside a single sentence. "There is beauty in the fracture." She attached a photo. People were standing outside taking pictures of my pieces as if they meant something larger than metal and stone. Maybe they did. But success, when it finally arrived, didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. I hired an assistant to help with packaging, then another to handle messages. I called suppliers, placed urgent orders for more chains, more boxes, more everything. The sound of tape and cardboard became the soundtrack of my life. I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. When I finally stepped outside, the air smelled like rain and exhaust. I walked without direction until I found myself across from a cafe window where 2 women sat talking. One of them was wearing my pendant, the small opal with the visible seam. She didn't know me, of course, but watching her talk, gesture, laugh, I felt something like peace. My work had left my hands and entered the world. Later that night, Sophia called. "I saw your name in that store window," she said. "I didn't realize your little project had grown." There was a pause, heavy enough to count as history. "It's not little anymore," I replied. She laughed softly, the way she used to when she was proud but pretending not to be. "Maybe we should catch up. I could help you scale." "I'm fine building at my own pace," I said. After the call, I stared at the dark screen of my phone. I wasn't angry. I just felt distance, the kind that comes when 2 people finally stop orbiting each other and learn to stand on separate ground. That weekend, the Broken Light launch crossed 1,000 orders. I celebrated by doing laundry, sweeping the studio, and breathing. Not every victory needs champagne. Sometimes survival itself is the celebration. At midnight, I posted one last message to the community that had built itself around this quiet storm. To everyone who shared, commented, or whispered my story to a friend, thank you. You turned a whisper into a movement. If this story reminded you that ordinary hands can build extraordinary things, leave a note below. Tell me what you're creating next. Let's keep the light moving. The post went viral again, but this time it didn't surprise me. I'd learned that momentum grows in silence long before the world hears the sound, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for applause. I was listening for the hum of work that lasts. And success has a strange smell. It isn't champagne or celebration. It's packaging tape, overworked metal, and the faint panic of deadlines. For weeks after the launch, my apartment turned into a small factory. Boxes stacked against the walls like unfinished sentences. Every surface glittered with tiny fragments of chain and dust. The hum of printers and the hiss of the torch were the only proof I was still moving. At first, it was exhilarating. Every ping of a new order felt like applause. Every email from a journalist sounded like validation in disguise. But success, when it grows faster than you can hold it, begins to feel like drowning in the water you prayed for. Suppliers fell behind. My courier misplaced shipments. The website crashed twice in a single weekend. I was too busy to sleep, too afraid to stop. When customers wrote asking about delays, I answered every message personally, apologizing as if their disappointment could erase months of quiet building. My hands burned from the heat of the torch. My wrists throbbed. Still, I kept going. One night, after packaging orders until dawn, I scrolled through my messages and found one from Sophia. I saw a few complaints online, she wrote. Scaling isn't for everyone. Maybe you should bring in someone who actually understands business. I stared at the screen for a long time, my exhaustion twisting into something sharp. There it was again, that tone of casual superiority. I could almost hear her voice at the dinner table years ago. Some people build companies, others build hobbies. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, sat in silence, and listened to the sound of my breathing. For the first time in months, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something that didn't come from a takeout box. My body ached for care the way my heart once ached for recognition. The next morning, my assistant Anna arrived early. She was young, nervous, and fiercely organized, the kind of person who made order out of chaos. She looked around the room, at the stacks of unshipped boxes, and the spreadsheet of delayed orders. You can't keep doing this alone, she said. I have to, I replied. People are counting on me. Then let them count on us, she said quietly. If you keep burning like this, there won't be anything left of you. Her words landed harder than she knew. I had built Broken Light on the idea that cracks were beautiful, but even beauty collapses under pressure if you refuse to rest. That afternoon, I gave her control of customer service and hired a second artisan, Maya, to help with assembly. It felt like letting go of control, like trusting strangers with something sacred, but it also felt like breathing again. Still, storms don't pass easily. 1 week later, a popular influencer posted a video accusing my designs of being mass-produced knockoffs. She had mistaken a counterfeit shop that stole my photos for my official site. The damage spread faster than truth ever could. My inbox flooded with anger. Hashtags appeared questioning my integrity. For an hour, I sat frozen. Then I opened my camera. I built this brand with my own hands, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Every piece you've ever seen was made here, in this small studio, by people who care about craft. There are fake sites stealing my images. Don't let noise destroy something honest. I posted it, and went back to work. By morning, the video had been viewed 1 million times. People rallied to defend me, posting photos of their real jewelry and tagging Kadi broken but true. The counterfeit shop vanished overnight. For the first time, the storm worked in my favor. That same day, a journalist from a national magazine called. Your story's everywhere, she said. You turned a crisis into a community. Can I interview you for our Women in Business series? I hesitated. For years, Sophia had been the face of accomplishment in our family, her interviews framed by bright lights and bold fonts. I'd always been the shadow in the audience. The idea of telling my story out loud felt both thrilling and dangerous, but I agreed. The interview went live the following week. The headline read, "The artist who built $1 million brand from a broken stone." The photos showed me in my studio, hands dirty with metal dust, smiling like someone who had finally remembered her own worth. That night, Sophia called. "So it's official," she said. "You're the family celebrity now." I laughed softly. "I'm just working." "Right," she said. "Working your way into my territory." Her voice carried something brittle, a crack she didn't realize was showing. I almost told her it didn't have to be a competition, that success wasn't a throne. It was a field big enough for both of us. But I didn't. Some lessons have to be learned in silence. Instead, I recorded another video for my community, this time slower, more deliberate. When the noise comes, and it always does, remember why you started. Not for likes, not for validation, but for the quiet moment when your work feels like truth. If this story reminds you to keep creating through chaos, share it. Someone out there is on the edge of giving up tonight. Be the reason they don't. By morning, my follower count had doubled again. Sales surged. Emails came from small boutiques asking to carry my line. What had begun as fire and fear had turned into expansion. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in the silence that followed. The moment I realized I no longer flinched at my sister's name, or at the thought of being seen. The storm had burned away everything unnecessary, leaving only what mattered: work, purpose, and the steady pulse of creation that didn't need permission to exist. At midnight, I stood at the window watching the city lights flicker in the glass like reflections of the opals on my desk. My reflection looked tired, older maybe, but solid. I whispered the same words I'd written on my first website months before. There is beauty in the fracture. And this time, I believed everyone. And if you've faced your own storm, if you've rebuilt after everything tried to break you, tell your story below. Share this chapter with someone who needs to remember that fire doesn't just destroy, it forges. The month it happened began without warning, the way turning points always do, quietly, almost politely. No dramatic sunrise, no miracle headline. Just me, sitting at my desk with a cup of cold coffee, sorting invoices that had outgrown my folders. The studio still smelled like metal and citrus cleaner. Outside, the city was waking up, ordinary and unaware that my life was about to shift again. By then, Broken Light had grown from a one-woman operation into a small team. Anna handled logistics. Maya oversaw production. I had hired 2 interns who labeled packages and answered customer messages. Our days ran on lists, caffeine, and a rhythm of shared exhaustion that somehow felt like purpose. The store orders kept climbing, and the new spring collection, Ember Lines, was due to launch in 2 weeks. The name had come to me late one night, staring at the faint scars on my hands left by the torch. Every burn, every mark, was proof that beauty demanded endurance. Ember Lines, I had written in my notebook, jewelry that remembers the fire it came from. We photographed the pieces in the corner of the studio, matte gold against black velvet, opals glowing like trapped storms. No models, no filters, just light and truth. The launch campaign was a single sentence. From the fire, something lasting. I didn't expect it to explode. At 9 a.m. on launch day, I posted the announcement video. It was simple. Me narrating while close-up shots showed the process. Hammer, heat, polish, reflection. I ended with a question that had become almost a ritual for my audience. What have you built through fire that made you stronger? Tell me below. For a while, it was quiet. Then, like a slow tide, the comments began. People shared their stories, recovery, grief, rebuilding. Strangers turned confession into community. By noon, the video had reached 500,000 views. By evening, the site had crashed again. Too many orders, too much traffic. I stood frozen, watching the dashboard flicker red. Anna burst into the room, her laptop under her arm. "We're trending," she said breathlessly. "The link's everywhere. You're #1 on the platform's discovery page." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I laughed, loud and sudden, the sound of disbelief breaking through years of restraint. That night, I barely slept. The numbers kept climbing. 10,000 orders in 24 hours, then 15. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. At 3 a.m., I opened my messages and saw one from Sophia. "You made 7 figures in a day? No greeting, no congratulations. just disbelief wrapped in envy. I didn't answer. Some silences speak louder than any victory speech. By the end of the week, we crossed $1 million in revenue, a number I had never even dared to write down, now printed in black on my accounting sheet. I stared at it for a long time, trying to recognize myself inside it. I had dreamed of success, but never of this scale. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing inside a storm I had summoned. Powerful, luminous, but dangerous if I looked away too long. News outlets started calling again. One article headline read, "The sister who quietly built an empire." That was how they framed it, as a rivalry. I refused to feed that story. Every time a journalist mentioned Sophia, I redirected the question back to the craft, the team, the purpose. "This isn't about competition," I said. "It's about creation." But privately, I could feel the shift between us harden. Sophia sent one final message. "You've changed." She was right. But change wasn't betrayal. It was evolution. With growth came more pressure. Retailers wanted larger orders. Investors wanted meetings. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. I learned to say no. Politely. Firmly. I'd spent too long earning freedom to sell it for speed. Then came the magazine feature. A national publication, the kind Sophia used to grace, wanted a full spread on the woman redefining resilience. The photo shoot took place in my studio. They asked me to stand beside my workbench, hands dusted in gold, eyes looking directly at the lens. When the issue hit stands, my face stared back from the cover. I almost didn't recognize the woman there, poised, assured, lit by the same light that used to hide me. My inbox filled with messages from women I had never met. "I showed your article to my daughter. You made me believe it's not too late to start again." It wasn't about jewelry anymore. It was about reflection, the kind that turns personal survival into collective permission. That weekend, we celebrated in the only way I knew how, quietly. The team gathered in the studio, takeout containers on the workbench, music playing low. Anna raised her cup of coffee and said, "To the fire that didn't win." We laughed, but there was truth in it. Every late night, every failure, every insult had led here. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked to the window. The city stretched out beneath me, alive, indifferent, perfect. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, the pendant around my neck catching the light. I whispered, "You did it," not as triumph, but as acknowledgement. Then, because I couldn't help myself, I opened my phone and recorded a short message for the people who had been following this journey since the beginning. $1 million doesn't make you successful. What makes you successful is remembering who you were before anyone noticed. I built this in silence, one mistake at a time. And so can you. If this story reminds you that your fire isn't a flaw, share it. Someone needs that reminder tonight. The comments flooded in. Some cheered, some cried, some simply wrote, "Still building." And as I read their words, I understood something I had missed all along. Success isn't measured in sales or headlines. It's measured in the quiet chorus of people who whisper, "You made me believe I can too." The $1 million month wasn't an ending. It was the moment I finally realized that visibility and purpose could coexist, that I didn't have to choose between being seen and staying true. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark for a while, letting the quiet settle like gold dust. Outside, the city pulsed with energy. Inside, my studio breathed with its own kind of light, steady, human, and real. If you've ever reached a milestone that felt impossible, take a moment to look back at the path that burned beneath it. Share this chapter with someone chasing their first spark. Leave a comment below. What does your version of $1 million month look like? Not in money, but in meaning. The first month after the magazine cover should have felt like a dream. On paper, everything I'd ever wanted was finally mine. Recognition, money, momentum. The studio was running at full speed. Production doubled. Orders shipped across continents. I was being invited to conferences, asked to speak about female entrepreneurship, photographed under perfect lights by people who used to overlook me entirely. But success, I discovered, has its own gravity. The higher you rise, the more it pulls at the soft places you thought were safe. The exhaustion was different now, not the honest fatigue of creation, but the bone-deep weariness of constantly performing control. Every day arrived with new demands. Interviews, emails, partnership proposals, meetings with investors who called me a phenomenon. That word again. They said it like a compliment, but it felt like a countdown, as if what I had built existed only until the next big thing replaced me. I missed my bench, the smell of metal and heat, the private rhythm of work that didn't require an audience. The world wanted the symbol, not the woman who had solder burns on her hands. I used to find peace in silence. Now, silence felt like negligence. Anna noticed before I did. One evening, she lingered at the studio after everyone had left. "You haven't touched your tools in weeks," she said. "When's the last time you made something just for you?" I started to answer, but the words didn't come. It had been months, maybe longer. The truth was simple and sharp. In chasing recognition, I had stopped creating from the same place that once saved me. I had become the image of success my sister once embodied. Efficient, polished, untouchable. I had turned into the thing I swore I'd never become. The next morning, I canceled a panel appearance in Los Angeles and spent the day alone in the studio. The city outside kept moving, but time inside slowed to its natural pace, the quiet pulse of creation. I pulled out a small piece of silver and an opal fragment left from an older batch. My hands remembered what my mind had forgotten: the heat of the torch, the hiss of solder, the tiny tremor of focus that pushes everything else aside. By midnight, a new piece sat cooling on the bench. Imperfect, asymmetrical, luminous. I named it the crown, not because it looked regal, but because it reminded me of the invisible weight success places on your head and the courage it takes to carry it without letting it crush you. The next morning, I posted a photo of it with no caption, just the image, raw and simple. Within an hour, thousands of comments poured in. What does it mean? Will it be for sale? Why is it different? I replied once, "It's not for sale, it's for remembering." That single line spread faster than any campaign I'd ever designed. People began sharing their own crowns, tokens, memories, scars, symbols of what they'd carried and survived. A movement grew again, unplanned, born out of honesty rather than strategy. But success doesn't only attract admiration, it attracts scrutiny. A week later, an investor I had turned down published an op-ed suggesting that Broken Light was an emotionally manipulative brand profiting from vulnerability. The article went viral. Others joined in, dissecting my words, my story, even my motives. Overnight, the same voices that had once celebrated me were demanding to know if my authenticity was real. I stayed quiet. I'd learned that storms lose their force faster when you stop feeding them, but the silence came at a cost. Orders slowed. The team worried. For a few nights, I barely slept. Sophia called during that time. "Now you know," she said softly. "The higher they lift you, the sharper the knives." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was almost kind, as if for the first time she saw me not as competition, but as a mirror. We talked for over an hour, not about business or strategy, but about fatigue, expectations, the loneliness of being the one everyone looks at, but no one really sees. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. When I hung up, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Success had stripped away the rivalry. We were both just women who had chased validation until it turned to ash. The next day, I met with my team. I told them we were pausing production for 2 weeks. "We need to remember why we started," I said. They looked surprised, but none of them argued. For the first time, we cleaned the studio instead of working in it. We threw away scraps that no longer served us. We made tea instead of timelines. Then together, we built something new, a smaller collection, personal, unpolished. We called it Crown Fire. Each piece contained a visible fracture filled with a thin line of gold. The campaign message was simple: wear your survival, not to hide what broke, but to honor it. The response was overwhelming again, but this time I didn't watch the numbers. I watched the stories. Customers sent photos wearing their pieces with captions like, "Divorced but still shining, recovered from illness, starting again." The world had returned to its right scale, not millions of clicks, but 1,000 beating hearts. Late one night, I found myself sitting alone in the studio, the crown pendant resting on my palm. It was heavier than I remembered, not the metal, the meaning. Every scar, every mistake, every sleepless night was forged into that weight. And for the first time, I didn't want to put it down. I recorded one final message before turning off the lights. Success is a crown, but it's not made of gold. It's forged from pressure, pain, and persistence. It's heavy, and it hurts, but it's proof you endured. If you're carrying your own version of it, Don't be ashamed of the weight. It means you're still standing. If this chapter reminded you that strength has a price, share it. Someone else needs to know they're not weak for being tired. They're just wearing the crown. I posted it and went to bed. By morning, the video had reached millions, but for once I didn't check the metrics. I just opened the blinds, let the sun fill the room, and breathed. The crown was still heavy, but now I knew how to carry it. That every dream has a cost, but not every cost has to break you. Tell me below, what's the heaviest thing you've carried that made you stronger? And if this story resonated, share it with someone still learning how to hold their crown without letting it fall. The first morning after the Crown Fire collection ended, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, there was no calendar alert, no shipment deadline, no interview waiting in my inbox. The studio was quiet. Dust floated through the slanted light like slow snow. The city outside hummed faintly, distant and forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't feel chased by my own ambition. I made coffee the way I used to. No rush, no phone in my hand. The bitterness tasted like memory. The desk was still covered with sketches and notes, but I didn't open my laptop. I just sat, letting the silence stretch until it stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like peace. It's strange how stillness feels foreign after too much noise. For so long, I had equated movement with progress, attention with purpose. Now, the absence of both felt like a test. Who was I when there were no metrics to measure me? The team had insisted I take time off. Go somewhere quiet, Anna had said. You've earned the right to disappear for a while. I booked a cabin by the ocean 2 hours north of the city. The night before I left, I walked through the studio one last time. The smell of metal lingered, mixed with wax and cedar. On the workbench sat the crown pendant, still tarnished at the edges. I slipped it into my pocket without knowing why. The cabin was small, wooden walls, wide windows, the sea visible through wind-worn glass. For days I barely spoke. I read. I walked along the cliffs. I watched waves break themselves into light. Silence became its own language. It taught me that creation isn't only born from hunger. Sometimes it's born from rest. At night, I'd sit by the window with a notebook and write sentences that weren't for marketing or captions. They were for me. Thoughts like, the world measures success in noise, but meaning lives in the quiet. Or, maybe the goal isn't to stay visible, but to stay true. One evening, during a long walk along the shoreline, I saw a small piece of glass half buried in the sand, ocean-worn, edges softened, glowing faintly green in the fading light. Sea glass, a fragment once sharp, now transformed by time and pressure. I turned it over in my hand, and it felt like recognition. The sea had done to that glass what the last 3 years had done to me, broken me open, smoothed me down, taught me how to shine without cutting anyone. I carried the piece back to the cabin and set it beside my bed. That night, I dreamed of my old workbench, but instead of opals and metal, there were shards of sea glass scattered across it. I woke with the idea already formed. A new collection, smaller, simpler. No campaigns, no public announcement, just art. Something to remind people that silence, too, has beauty. When I returned to the city, the studio felt smaller, almost intimate again. The team was waiting with updates. New orders, emails from magazines, requests for appearances. I listened, nodded, and then said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head for days. We're going to slow down. They looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Slow down? Anna repeated. We're at our peak. Exactly, I said. And peaks are meant to be followed by breath. We build something new. Not bigger, just truer. They didn't argue. They trusted me enough to know that stillness, in my world, always meant transformation. The sea glass collection took shape slowly, each piece molded around fragments I found along that same shore. Transparent, imperfect, soft. We didn't chase trends or viral posts. We didn't announce the release with fireworks. One quiet morning, I simply uploaded the photos to the website with a note. When the noise fades, what remains is what's real. No hashtags, no countdown, just that. The reaction surprised me, not for its scale, but for its intimacy. Customers wrote messages saying they had been waiting for this kind of quiet, that the new pieces reminded them of healing, that the simplicity spoke louder than the spectacle. For the first time, I saw my work not as rebellion, not as triumph, but as reflection. A few weeks later, I received a message from Sophia. It was short. I bought one of your sea glass pieces. It's beautiful. I'm proud of you. No pretense, no competition. Just sister to sister. I stared at the words for a long time before replying, "Thank you. I finally understand what success really is." After I sent it, I went to the window. The city lights flickered in the glass like faint constellations. The same view I'd seen 100 times before, but it felt different now. Quieter, steadier. The hunger was gone. What remained was presence. That night, I recorded what would become one of my final messages for the audience that had grown with me from the beginning. We spend so much time chasing what's next that we forget how to love what's here. I thought success was about proving people wrong, but it's really about finding a rhythm you don't have to recover from. If this story reminds you to rest, to listen, to breathe, share it. Maybe someone you love needs to be told that peace is a kind of power too. When I posted it, I didn't check the numbers. I closed the app and turned off the lights. The studio glowed faintly in the moonlight. Tools resting, dust dancing, the world finally still. I took the crown from its shelf and placed it next to the piece of sea glass. Metal and ocean, fire and water. Proof that everything can be remade if given enough time. I breathed deeply and freely for the first time in years, and in the quiet that followed, I realized that silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was the sound of peace returning home. If you've ever built your life in noise, take a moment to listen to the quiet. Tell me below, what does silence mean to you now? And if this story brought you calm, share it with someone still searching for their stillness. The past has a way of knocking quietly before it enters. A familiar scent, an old song, a name you thought you'd forgotten. For me, it arrived one Thursday morning in the form of an email with a subject line I hadn't seen in years. Partnership proposal. Petrosian & Co. I almost laughed. Petrosian & Co. was one of the largest luxury jewelry houses in New York, the same company that had declined my application for an internship nearly a decade ago. I remembered that rejection vividly, the polite email that began, "While we were impressed with your enthusiasm," and ended with a sentence that shaped me. "We are looking for candidates with more conventional experience." Conventional. I'd built my empire on defying that word. Now, a vice president from that same company was asking to meet. They wanted a collaboration, a joint collection to merge Broken Light's emotional storytelling with Petrosian's legacy craftsmanship. I stared at the message for a long time. It was flattering, strategic, and profitable, but something about it felt like déjà vu wearing expensive clothes. I closed the laptop without replying. Instead, I took a walk through the city, the same streets where I'd once carried boxes of unsold jewelry, where I'd measured my worth in rejections. The shops looked the same, but I didn't. I was no longer chasing doors to open. I was deciding which ones to walk through. That evening, I found the crown pendant again on my desk, its surface dull with fingerprints. I held it up to the light and thought about the version of me who had once begged to be seen. What would she say now? Probably, "You wanted this, didn't you?" The proof that you made it. And yet, the thought of returning to that world, the gleam without soul, the applause without rest, made me feel tired in a way success never should. The next morning, I called Sophia. We hadn't spoken in weeks, but the new honesty between us had begun to feel natural. "They offered me a partnership," I said. "With Petrosian?" Her voice lifted in surprise. "That's huge, I know. But I don't know if it's right." She was quiet for a moment. 10 years ago, you would have killed for that offer. 10 years ago, I was building to prove something. Now I just want to build what feels true. There was a long pause, the kind that used to hold competition, but now held understanding. "Maybe that's the difference between success and peace," she said softly. I didn't answer right away. I was watching sunlight move across the room, landing on the scattered fragments of sea glass still waiting to be set. That light, quiet, imperfect, alive, was the only validation I needed. Still, part of me felt compelled to face the past, not to reclaim it, but to close it. So I agreed to a meeting with Petrosian & Co. Their headquarters occupied an entire floor of a glass tower. The lobby was pristine, air-conditioned, filled with the hush of expensive carpets and ambition. The executive, polished, friendly, wearing a watch that probably cost as much as my first car, shook my hand and spoke in compliments rehearsed to sound spontaneous. "We've followed your brand for a long time. The narrative of resilience, the handcrafted authenticity, it's exactly what the market craves right now." That sentence, "what the market craves," told me everything I needed to know. They didn't see the art. They saw strategy, They saw vulnerability as aesthetic, not truth. He slid a folder across the table. We're proposing a co-branded collection. Your name would appear beside ours. It's a chance to elevate Broken Light into the global luxury sphere. I opened the folder, skimmed the numbers, and smiled. Not because I was tempted, but because the offer was exactly what I'd spent years thinking would save me. Now I understood that it couldn't. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, closing the folder. But Broken Light was built to remind people that imperfection has value. I can't make that message luxury. It has to stay human. He blinked, surprised. You're turning it down? Yes, I said simply. You can't mass-produce meaning. When I left the building, the air outside felt different, lighter, like exhaling something I didn't realize I'd been holding in for years. The city noise no longer sounded like chaos. It sounded like rhythm, my own rhythm. That night, I returned to the studio and found the team already working. Anna was cataloging orders. Maya was testing new polishing techniques. They looked up as I walked in, waiting for news. We're staying small, I said. No expansion, no investors, just us, and what we love. Relief spread across their faces like sunlight breaking through cloud. I spent the rest of the night at my bench, working on a new piece, a thin silver band with a single embedded crack, filled not with gold this time, but with clear resin, transparent as glass. I wanted it to look like a healed scar. I named it Echo. When it was done, I photographed it under soft light and wrote a caption that wasn't a pitch or a slogan, just truth. Every story leaves a mark. The goal isn't to erase it. It's to live so gently that it no longer hurts to look. The post didn't go viral. It didn't need to. Those who understood deeply. That was enough. A week later, a small box arrived at the studio. No note, just a necklace inside. Old, elaborate, unmistakably Petrosian. It was the same design I'd admired in their display case all those years ago, when I couldn't afford anything but admiration. On the back, someone had engraved 2 words: keep creating. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe the executive, maybe someone who'd read the article about my refusal. But it made me smile. Even echoes, it seemed, could be kind. That evening, I recorded a final message before closing the studio for the night. Sometimes the world circles back to test you, to see if the person you've become still remembers who you were. The test isn't whether you get the offer you once dreamed of. It's whether you still recognize the sound of your own voice when you say no. If this story reminds you to honor how far you've come, share it. Someone out there is still standing at the door you already walked through. I turned off the lights. The studio glowed faintly under the city's reflection, the old and the new layered like memory. Somewhere outside, the future waited, not as a race, but as a continuation. The echoes of the past had found me, and for the first time, I didn't need to answer. If you've ever faced the version of yourself you thought you'd outgrown, tell me below, what did you say to them? Share this with someone learning that saying no can be its own kind of victory. Why now, Moeen? In the studio had always been alive with motion, metal ringing against metal, the low hiss of the torch, the murmur of music someone forgot to turn off. But now, there was a new sound, laughter. It started softly, threading through the rhythm of work like a melody we hadn't realized was missing. The air felt lighter, less like pressure, more like belonging. It had been 6 months since the Echo piece, 6 months since I'd chosen peace over expansion. The world outside still moved at its impossible pace, but inside our small workshop, time obeyed us. Orders came steadily, not in floods. The numbers were smaller, the conversations deeper. We weren't chasing virality anymore. We were tending to what had already bloomed. I had started a mentorship program quietly. No press releases, no cameras, just an open invitation posted one evening. If you're an artist who's been told you're too small to matter, come work with us. Learn, create, and keep your name on your work. Applications poured in. We chose 4 women, 2 from the city, 1 from a small coastal town, and 1 who'd just immigrated with her daughter. Each brought a story that hummed beneath her craft. The first time they stepped into the studio, their nervous energy reminded me of who I had been when I started, desperate to be taken seriously, terrified of being seen. I called them the light keepers, not apprentices, not employees, keepers, because that's what we were now, a circle of hands preserving something fragile and necessary. The first day we worked side by side in silence. Then the questions began, about tools, techniques, stories. By the end of the week, the studio was alive with conversation. We weren't just making jewelry anymore. We were translating experiences into metal and stone. One made a pendant inspired by the scar on her wrist from an old accident. Another designed rings that fit together but didn't lock, a metaphor for love that doesn't cage. Every evening, I'd walk home covered in dust, exhausted, but alive. It wasn't the adrenaline of ambition this time. It was the quiet satisfaction of purpose shared. One afternoon, while reviewing designs, Anna looked at me across the table. "You know this is bigger than jewelry, right?" she said. "You're teaching them to believe in themselves the way you finally learned to believe in you." Her words sank deep. I hadn't thought of it like that, but she was right. For years, my fight had been solitary. Me against doubt, me against invisibility, me against Sophia's shadow. But creation, I was learning, multiplies when shared. Power isn't something you keep, it's something you pass on. That night, I stayed late in the studio. The city lights glittered through the window, reflections of 1,000 other lives happening at once. I sat at my bench, holding a small opal between tweezers, its colors shifting like thought. I wasn't designing a product this time. I was designing a legacy. I melted scraps from old collections, fragments of broken light, shards of crown fire, bits of sea glass. I poured them together into a single mold. The resulting pendant was rough, irregular, streaked with traces of each era. I named it Continuum. The next morning I gathered everyone. "This is what we've been building," I said, showing them the piece. Not perfection. Continuity. Every hand that touches this work leaves something behind. That's what makes it alive. We decided to produce Continuum as a collective. Each lightkeeper would craft her own version, sign it, and keep part of the profit. No hierarchies, no hidden ownership, just craft and credit. The response was immediate and heartfelt. Customers loved that each pendant was unique, hand-signed, and imperfect. But what moved me most were the letters. People writing to say they felt seen, not just by me, but by the women whose names now accompanied each piece. One letter came from a teacher in Oregon. "I bought the pendant made by Fatima. When I wear it, I feel like I'm carrying the story of a woman I've never met, but somehow understand." I read that line over and over. The world had finally learned what I'd known all along. Connection is the real currency of art. A month later, Sophia came to visit the studio. She stood by the door for a long time, watching the lightkeepers work. The clang of hammers, the smell of solder, the music humming low. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's home," I replied. She picked up one of the Continuum pendants, turning it in her hand. "You've built something I can't even quantify," she said. "You always wanted meaning. I just wanted recognition." "You can still have both," I said. "But meaning has to come first." She smiled, tired and soft. "Maybe you can teach me." For the first time, I realized I wanted to. Not to win, not to prove, but to heal. That evening, after she left, I sat by the window and recorded another message for the community. Not to sell, not to announce, but simply to share. For a long time, I thought my light was something I had to guard. Small, fragile, mine. But light doesn't weaken when it's shared. It multiplies. If you've ever built something out of nothing, and then watched it grow in someone else's hands, you know what I mean. If this story reminds you to pass the torch instead of hiding it, share it. Let's keep the light moving forward. I closed the camera and watched the city flicker like a constellation of stories. Somewhere, people were wearing our pieces, carrying our fingerprints, our laughter, our lessons. Somewhere, another woman was starting her own version of broken light, her own quiet revolution. The thought filled me with something deeper than pride. Continuity. The sense that nothing I'd built would ever really end, not as long as someone else was brave enough to begin. I turned off the lights, but the room didn't go dark. The jewelry on the tables caught the glow of the street lamps, scattering it across the walls. It looked like the room itself was breathing, pulsing with fragments of everything we'd been through. Failure, triumph, forgiveness, renewal. I whispered into the stillness. We're all lightkeepers in the end. And for the first time, the silence answered back. Maelstrom, if this chapter reminds you of a teacher, a mentor, or anyone who once handed you a spark, thank them. Share this story with them. And tell me below, whose light are you carrying forward? It happened quietly, the way all endings do. Not with a grand finale, but with the soft understanding that the story has already become part of something larger. A year had passed since Continuum launched. The studio had grown into a sanctuary that hummed with steady creation. Every wall carried a piece of our history. Sketches pinned beside press clippings, photographs of the lightkeepers at their benches, a small framed photo of my father in his workshop, smiling faintly at the camera, as if proud of what he knew I would one day become. The morning light poured through the windows, dust motes swirling like fragments of time. I was alone. The team had gone home early after finishing the last shipment of the season. The silence felt dense, not empty. I walked slowly through the space, tracing my fingers over the tables scarred by years of heat and creation. The scratches, burns, and stains told a story no photograph ever could. On the main bench sat two objects side by side, the crown and the sea glass, metal and ocean, fire and calm, opposites that somehow belonged together. They had traveled the entire arc of my journey with me, from ambition to peace, from noise to stillness. I lifted them both, feeling the weight of everything they represented. It was strange to think how a life can be measured by objects. My sister once measured hers in stock valuations and milestones. I measured mine in fragments, stones, solder, silence. Yet, here I was, standing inside a story I'd once doubted would ever be written, breathing proof that transformation doesn't roar, it whispers. That afternoon, the door opened, and Sophia walked in. She'd been visiting more often lately, helping with business tasks, mentoring one of the younger artisans. There was no competition left between us, only recognition. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, smiling. "Thought I'd drop by before your trip." Tomorrow, I was flying to London for an exhibit, my first international showcase. The curator had chosen to feature Continuum as a central installation, a suspended cluster of pendants, each piece catching light from a slow-turning chandelier. An ecosystem of resilience, he'd called it. I hadn't corrected him. I liked that description. Sophia looked around the studio, the same way she used to look at my small apartment years ago. Curious, assessing, quietly proud. "It's different every time I come," she said. "So am I," I replied. She smiled. "You know, I still remember that night. The dinner when I said you'd never match my success. I thought I was joking, but I can still see your face when I said it." "I remember," I said softly. "But you were right. I didn't match it. I built something else." Her eyes glistened, not with guilt, but with understanding. "You built something better." We stood in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a small box wrapped in linen. Inside was a necklace, gold, delicate, familiar. "It's one of yours," she said, "from the early days. I bought it under another name. I didn't want you to know until now." I laughed quietly. "You were my first secret customer?" She nodded. "I wanted to understand what people saw in your work. Now I do." I fastened the necklace around my neck and felt the opal against my skin. Cool, imperfect, alive. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After she left, the studio felt different, lighter, almost translucent. I sat at my bench, the way I used to in the beginning, and opened my notebook. Inside were pages of old ideas, designs I'd never finished, sketches from nights when I was too tired to believe. I turned to a blank page and wrote at the top, "Full circle." Underneath, I drew something simple, a single continuous line forming a pendant shaped like a spiral. No beginning, no end. It wasn't about perfection or fame anymore. It was about continuity, how stories fold into themselves, how creation never really stops. Later that night, I recorded the last video I would post under the broken light banner. My voice was calm, steady, almost a whisper. When I started this journey, I thought success meant proving everyone wrong. Then I thought it meant being seen. But now I know it's simpler than that. Success is when your life stops asking for applause and starts giving something back. Every scar, every silence, every small beginning, it all led here. And if you're watching this, maybe it's leading you somewhere too. I paused, letting the words breathe. So here's my message one last time. Don't wait for the world to notice your light. Shine anyway. Build anyway. Begin anyway. Because the truth is, the world always catches up to authenticity. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when it does, you'll realize you were never behind. You were just early. I ended with a line I'd written years ago, but never said aloud. I built this empire not to be admired, but to remind you that the broken pieces were never the end. They were the beginning. I uploaded the video and didn't look at the numbers. For once, I didn't need to know how it performed. I already knew what it meant. The next morning, before leaving for the airport, I returned to the beach where sea glass had been born. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my feet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pouch. Inside were fragments of opal, silver dust, and a single cracked pendant that had never sold. I knelt and buried them in the sand, a quiet offering. The ocean hissed softly, like approval. As the wind rose, I whispered the words that had carried me through every transformation. There is beauty in the fracture. Then I turned away and began to walk back, leaving the sea to reclaim what was once broken. When the plane lifted hours later, the coastline disappeared beneath the clouds. I watched the horizon until it blurred into light. Somewhere below, my story was still unfolding, in the hands of the lightkeepers, in the hearts of strangers wearing pieces of my past. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to control what came next. I had built enough, healed enough, shared enough. The circle had closed, perfectly imperfect. And as the clouds opened and the sun spilled across the sky, I understood. The point was never to outshine anyone. It was to illuminate what had always been there, the quiet truth that broken light is still light. If this story has followed you from the beginning, thank you. Share this final chapter with someone building their own circle. Tell me below, what did you learn from your fractures? What beauty did you find inside your own broken light?